Joining us now to talk about the news media today is former New York City TV reporter Frank Cipolla. He's also the CEO of media coaching and guest placement company Contacts Media, and the author of the book, It Shocked Even Us. Frank joins us live here. Frank, how are you?
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with both of you. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining us here this morning. So let's get right to it. How is social media changing journalism? We all know President Trump loved Twitter, and it was a huge tool he used to communicate directly to the people, and which got taken away from him a couple weeks back. But plus, there's so much info flying around social media, and it has to be difficult for reporters to decipher fact from fiction.
Well, it's actually changed in a few ways. It's changed the entire landscape, Kara and Lisa, and I'll tell you how. First of all, people are getting news on their phones as opposed to waiting for the 6 o'clock news or watching CNN or MSNBC and so on and so forth. So the news, which was almost immediate, is now even more immediate. Unfortunately, there's no gatekeeper on things like Facebook and Parler and so on and so forth. So you have to really go through the information to find out if it's accurate or not. I don't mind social media. I think it works very well. I love that people have cameras in their phones and they're taking video, car accidents and other events. All of that is wonderful. What I have an issue with, however, is there's no editor at the end to say, is this accurate? Did 2 people pass away in that car accident? Or was it 3? How do we know? We don't know. It's just information coming, for lack of a better description, with a fire hose as opposed to a regular hose where there's time to actually control what's going on. So I enjoy that part of it. I think that's good. With social media as well, a lot of my reporter friends are now telling me that everything is being pushed into the web. And that's the next generation. That's the evolution of news. I had a reporter whom I was speaking with in West Palm Beach, Florida the other day. And she said, Frank, my news director says, let's do the web story first before you even work on the broadcast story. So that's how immediate and important and how the web is really taking hold in social media.
Wow. That's really interesting. Frank, I, like you, also have, a background from, traditional journalism. I still have friends, family, and colleagues in the industry. Mm-hmm. Do you think, I've always kind of felt this way, particularly over the last 4 years, that the general population has a really poor understanding of how news is brought to them? And I think, you talked about how everybody has a camera in their phone. It seems that a lot of people are under the impression that journalists just go out and do the same thing, take a picture with their phone and post it up without doing that research that you talked about. Can you kind of talk just maybe briefly about how news, real journalistic news comes to people?
Well, I don't want to sound like the old guy. But first of all, let me say that this is a very noble profession. I tell every young reporter, this is a calling that you should really give your heart and soul to, as I did for so many years. And it is a great, noble profession. So to answer your question, it's changed in ways good and bad. I think there was a time when I was a cub reporter back in the 80s where you had to pay your dues. You had to go to journalism school. You had to learn how to construct a story, what was important, to check your facts and so on and so forth. For lack of a better description, you were allowed into the castle of a major market like New York or Philadelphia after you had paid your dues in smaller markets and really learned that trade, a skill. Nowadays, you find a lot of younger reporters who could use that seasoning before they're brought into the major markets. And a lot of them, unfortunately, and I talk with them all day long with regard to my company, Contacts Media, which is a guest placement company and a media coaching company. And I see a lot of great journalists who've gone to all the great schools, Syracuse, Northwestern University. They've learned their trade and they're actually burnt out because everybody is a citizen journalist now. And the cachet that we used to have of being a journalist has sort of gone away. But the really good ones, you watch them on a regular basis, they're doing their job well. Those are the ones you should aspire to. And that's what I tell them.
Yeah. Well, in politics, just circling back to present times.
Before you go on, it's almost like a News 12 reunion because my dear friend Laura Jones was on a moment ago and I absolutely love her. I worked with her briefly at News 12 as I did with your producer.
It is a News 12 reunion. Yes. Except me. I'm like the outlier, but that's okay.
You are the outcast.
Italian today, which is so funny. Anyway, so let's talk about the politics. Do you see President Biden having the Twitter impact that Trump had, or are we going to see now more back to basics?
Well, let me use an analogy, if I may. For most of modern history, since the television days of the 1950s and so on, and again, I'm sounding like the old guy, but I'm a historian of television. Since the beginning of that era, we have been watching documentaries. I'm using an analogy. We've been watching a documentary called The U.S. Presidency. And about 4 or 5 years ago, we decided, you know what, let's change the channel and watch a reality show. And we saw what happened. We saw the information, the misinformation, and so on and so forth. I think with the election of President Biden and his inauguration just a few days ago, what we're seeing is a return to normalcy. We're seeing regular press conferences. We're seeing information based in science and so on. I think we had where as a collective people here in the United States of America, we've had our little run with the reality show, and we realized that we didn't like it so much. And now we're back to watching documentaries.
I like that analogy very much, actually, Frank. Yeah, so for sure. So do you think, right now, we have a new president, we have President Biden, and a lot of politics is, the right message at the right time. If you were in charge of running communications for President Biden, what would you advise him to do?
Well, as a journalist, I'm going to tell you that I won't tell you my political bent, but I will tell you this. I think Joe Biden is off to a very good start in that he's reconstructing the presidency that, for all intents and purposes, was flipped upside down during the Trump administration. He has the regular press conferences. The information is coming out. He's regularly appearing before the cameras. He's answering the questions. And he said many, many times before, I'm going to give you the good and the bad. If I was controlling his media, I would do exactly what they're doing now. People need to be less stressed from, again, to use that analogy, that reality show that we saw in the last 4 years, and they need to get the information based in science and fact and so on. And I think over time, and I'm one of the few people that will say this, I think over time, people who are going to be helped by the policies of Joe Biden will sort of level out. And this Trumpism, this violence we saw a couple of weeks in Washington, this QAnon stuff and so on and so forth will just fade away. I truly believe that. People say that Trumpism is here to stay, that there's an angry populace. I don't see that. I see eventually, like the Tea Party, and the Tea Party was all the rage 8, 9 years ago, it will eventually fade away and we'll get back to what I mentioned a moment ago, some degree of normalcy.
Okay. Well, let's shift gears here and talk about your book, which I love the title. It Shocked Even Us.
It Shocked Even Us and More Crazy Stories Covering Local News is the full name. And, I started this about 10 years ago. Every morning I get out and I bang out about 3.5 pages. In essence, it's a look behind the scenes at all the stories I covered, a funny look behind the scenes, all the stories I've covered in and around New York City, part memoir as well. It's not deep in perspective. It's not political in any way. It just tells you what happens behind the scenes and my journey, quite frankly. I've been telling these funny stories to folks for years, and I finally put it down on paper. So, I'm happy to have it. It's just an easy, breezy, funny read with small, digestible stories. And if you're a news nick like I am, you're absolutely going to love it. If you've grown up in the New York metropolitan area and you've watched news your whole life, you're absolutely going to love it.
Frank, that sounds like it's got to be so much fun, especially as a seasoned journalist. I can't imagine the stories that you have to tell.
There are funny ones out there, and it goes from everything to the Exxon Valdez story, the press conference, to the guy in Harlem who had a tiger in his apartment, a full-grown tiger in his apartment.
In a Harlem apartment.
Taken out, and, all sorts of stories. The time I met Donald Trump in the elevator at Giants Stadium, all in there, all funny. I enjoyed writing it. It was another job, Kara and Lisa. I'm not going to lie to you. I told my bride not too long ago, I said, if I start writing a book again, stop me, because it was another job. But I organized the stories. I put them together. I'm very proud of it. And the sales have been going very well. And by the way, I'll have to plug the book because we all are salespeople. You can get it at itshockedevenus.com. It shocked, as in shocking, evenus.com. And I'll inscribe it for you as well.
That's great. Thank you, Frank. I definitely want to pick that up because even just those little teasers that you gave, I need to know the backstory behind that.
It's a crazy business, man. It's a crazy business.
Yes, it is. Well, thank you so much for joining us here this morning, and we hope to see you soon.
It's a pleasure. Thank you again. You can always have me on again, and have a great day, and glad to be on your show today.
Thank you so much, Frank.